Hello, everybody. This is Phantom139, and welcome back to my thoughts series on Destiny 2, the so-called named State of Destiny 2 series I started a year ago and have been continuing now. As promised in last October, I would be doing one of these in December as an ad priori on Season 8 and to gauge how the year to come has been looking so far. And this will probably be my last video of the year, but hey, let's go out on a bang, shall we? This one won't be terribly too long. The list of things I have to talk about is relatively short. I'm just going to recap a few key points from my October video and things that are still relevant moving forward, and hit a few hot points that the community's been discussing in the past season and recently. So let's go ahead and start. I want to just give a quick recap on the last video from October. We were only a few weeks into Shadowkeep at the time, so we only had the story, the raid, and some introductory Vex offensive stuff at the time. The video did launch before the dungeon and the Altars of Sorrow event started, as well as the Haunted Forest. My thoughts were generally neutral to positive on those activities, so I don't need to discuss anything there. I will also continue to stress the importance of removing weekly lockouts on in-game level activities. The dungeon has this to some regards, Nightfalls do as well. Raid should not lock players out of drops on subsequent clears in a week because of the stat rolls on Armor 2.0, so I feel like this is something that we still need to be discussing, and I will continue to do so. Also in the last video, I discussed the power grant a bit and my talking points on the matter. I stand by all of those, and we will actually go forward a bit with this a little bit more later, so stand by for that. Although there is no new raid that's launching in Season 9 and can't tell anything about Season 10 yet, I do want to reiterate that the next raid should do away with the 24-hour challenge and focus more on creating challenges that players can engage with at any point in time instead of artificial time gating and artificial challenges via the contest modifier. Raid rewards should be tied to challenges that can be completed at any point in time, such as flawless clears, and not forced upon players with a restricted window of opportunity. So those are more of the key points from last month's video, or the October video. So let's go ahead and talk about the points that I want to get through today. So first thing I want to go through is the Season 8 flaws that I think Bungie really needs to learn from moving forward in time. I will cover a few things that Season 9 does seem to do better with, but this is going to be more of a addendum on what Bungie needs to remember moving forward. So this video will mainly be focusing on Season 8, and we'll talk about most of the failures that the season had that Bungie really needs to make sure they don't do again, and how to avoid these problems moving forward. So first and foremost, we had the Vex Offensive. And I know a lot of people enjoyed this activity, but this was probably the first big flaw of the season, and it's because it was linear-based progression, no alterations or changes between runs. Therefore, it became monotonous at the end, the boss fight was very boring, and there were no unique rewards tied to this activity. So, given this was the seasonal activity, this was an incredibly weak addition to the game, and I was actually done with it within the first day of playing it, literally. We did, me and Zeke, we did our title grind, we did all of the challenges in the first day, and then we're like, okay, that's it, no more Vex Offensive. So, that was something that really needs to be looked at, and I think, at least with Season 9 so far, they've done a better job with the sundial having some unique changes week by week. Extending upon this, the final assault was probably the worst climax of the season I've ever seen from Bungie, and the community really grilled Bungie for this. There was so much time spent hyping up throughout the season through the weekly changes in the tower, the dialogue saying this was going to be a big fight, and then at the end of it, it was quite literally Vex Offensive again. Slap a portal on the boss and you get a different boss fight again that literally had no mechanical changes. So I cannot stress enough, Bungie, this cannot happen again. The community will roast you alive if it does, and I don't think you'll get back from that one. I've said this numerous times in the past, but innovation and creativity is really needed in these regards. So more than not, time needs to be dedicated to making sure the activity rewards are unique and that they're worth the chase. So make sure that is a thing going on. Next up in the season, we had our seasonal event, which was the Festival of the Lost, and they branded it as 2.0, although it was mainly just a repainting of the event. That's pretty much all that happened. Nothing changed. We had the exact same activity currency, mods, nothing changed from it. At least last year we had the time-gated quest, but I know people weren't a fan of the time-gating, but it brought back a fan-favorite exotic weapon from D1. We didn't get that this time. Moving forward, I think mixing up the seasonal activities needs to be a priority, and don't just repackage them again and say, oh, here's your event, and that's it, because that's kind of lazy. And honestly, I know we've talked about the Infinite Forest being underused in the past, but now it's kind of being overused, and I would rather you not do that again, unless you may intend on making it a permanent addition to the game. The final big blunder of the season, and this kind of goes through a design paradigm, was the change from pinnacle weapons to ritual weapons. So back when the season launched, Bungie said they would no longer be making pinnacle weapons because they became the top choice weapons in the game, like nothing else would matter. But the ritual weapons that replaced these pinnacle weapons required the exact same level of grind and came nowhere close to matching the original pinnacles in strength. So this line of thought is flawed because the pinnacle weapons already exist. They're there, and they're here to stay. Their perk combinations are too strong to ever be matched by non-pinnacle weapons. So if Bungie does not make new pinnacle weapons, then there's not going to be any replacements. There will never be the top choices or employed much due to the existence of the pinnacle weapons. So honestly, I feel like Bungie should just scrap that and go back to making pinnacle weapons, but be more cautious about perk creation to keep them relevant to their own modes. I think the Season 7 Pinnacles were great in those regards. We didn't have a Recluse 2.0 with Wendigo. I mean, Wendigo is a great weapon, but that's just because its perk is great. Another conversation that Bungie really needs to consider is modifying the existing pinnacle weapons. See if they need to be changed in the future to bring them in line with other weapons, or if they just need to introduce new random roll perks that can make other weapons come into the spotlight. I think that would be a great conversation that needs to be had. So those were pretty much the problems that Season 8 really highlighted. And I think from that perspective, Season 9 has done better in some regards, but seems to be moving forward with the same in others. So we'll see what Bungie decides to do, and I'll kind of highlight these again at the end of the video here. Next up, of course, we have to have a section on the Sandbox, because Sandbox team always seems to have some kind of an issue, and they can't seem to find that right spot. And again, they followed through with these mistakes again. First and foremost, we do need to talk about the Divinity Raid exotic. And I know some people have said that, well, stacking was said to be a thing of the past. But here's the thing to those people. Stacking buffs and debuffs is what makes MMO and RPG games unique. It's a balance of understanding which players contribute to the group, when and where. So the nerf and continued stance on removing stacking buffs and debuffs is a mistake in these regards. The fact that this bug was allowed to exist throughout the entire season was no mistake. I think Bungie created the weapon, and this was an intentional thing that it was going to be a separate stack, but Bungie noticed pretty quickly that, oh, look, they're one-phasing bosses again, so we have to get rid of this. Although Divinity still has the highest debuff percentage, it no longer feels like a raid-worthy reward and fits into the bin just like Taraba, or as we like to call it, Tarabble. I think this one needs to be undone completely. Bungie needs to go back to the drawing board for buffs and debuffs. If they're really afraid of spiraling numbers, they really should just drop the values of buffs and debuffs in general, maybe like 5% to 15%, and reallow stacking to promote group diversity. And my comment to the designers there is, so what if a specific subclass is desired in raids for their specific buffs or debuffs? Just use that as a notion to focus on improving the others. As I recall, Bungie announced way back that Year 3 was going to be between Armor and Subclass 2.0, and they went with Armor 2.0. So this subclass 2.0 still seems like a thing that may be coming in the future. So just revert until the 2.0 on subclasses comes along, and then just make sure that fixes the problem. Next up, we have the Wish Ender Bow, which a lot of people are really celebrating right now, like, oh, it's finally good. It's going through a phase of overpowered damage due to a bug with hitboxes, and many in the community want this to stay, but I don't think so. That's a crazy notion. I get people wanting underperforming exotics to be better, but the way this bug is working is not the way to achieve this. This should be patched, and as soon as possible. At the same time, though, there should be some kind of buff issue to the weapon. My personal thoughts is that you can retain the primary ammo. I know some people have mentioned changing it to a special ammo weapon, but maybe change the weapon to have 2 firing modes, kind of like Lord of Wolves, where the high damage mode has a slightly lower damage than what can be done now, but make it consume like 4 to 5 arrows per shot. Then we have everyone's favorite discussion, which is the elemental affinity on mods. And Bungie made a few strides to fix this in Season 9 by introducing general purpose mods. Problem is that these general purpose mods do not match the same level of power as the specific ones, or in many cases are actually missing from some specific cases where specific mods will do better. I think the general purpose mods also have the problem with the cost. They are significantly higher, and generally when you use one of these general mods, you lock yourself out of other good mod choices on your gear, whereas specific mods do better. I think the community feedback regarding Affinity really needs to be taken in by Bungie. It's not working. I stand by my original feedback that the mod costs as they are right now are fine, but just make it so it can be slotted in any piece of armor, and if you match your mod with an element on the armor, reduce the cost of the mod by 1 on that specific piece of gear. So that covers all of the sandbox topics that I have. Thankfully, there's not really that much to talk about because they didn't really do much. But now we're having to switch into the next area of discussion, which is the seasonal title grind. And this is going to be a thing that's going to be continuing throughout the entire year, and I feel like Bungie is going to be reiterating a few times, but this is kind of a one-off thing because once the season's done, you're out of luck. So Bungie decided at the start of year 3 that each season would have a unique title to earn, and that it would be Moments of Triumph style. So you complete all the objectives during the season, and you get the title. It was the I was there notion. The problem, though, is that they introduced a seasonal collection badge, which, by the way, has all of the ritual weapons and quests tied to them. And we saw with Season 8 that this was a pinnacle weapon length quest for all 3. It did not work well. They were incredibly grindy in nature, and some of these grind objectives were too challenging for many in the community to obtain in the limited time frame offered by the season. Those time-limited accomplishments, they do work for things like the Moments of Triumph, but I don't think they're going to be a good fit for seasonal content. So Bungie really needs to take a second look at these and understand what players really want out of the grind. My 2 solutions for this is just either 1, remove ritual weapons and the seasonal quest requirements from the title grind. Players do not enjoy engaging with all the activities. They should not be restricted based on that. Or the second way is you can retain them, but remove the time getting on the seal. So you can allow players to complete all the other objectives in the season and then go earn the weapons at some later point in time. As long as they have the other triumphs, they're good. As I mentioned, Season 9 has done a much better job on this front. This video, however, was feedback on Season 8, so this is going to be here as a reminder moving forward of things not to do. Alright. Next topic is activity rewards. This is one that the community is really hammering Bungie on at the point of making this video. And I think so far this has been one of the critical failures of year 3 as we've gone through. And it's something that Bungie really needs to fix, and soon. So progression in Season 8 was limited to daily repeatable bounties, and hard cap power climb was limited to an incredibly small list of activities to slow progression to essentially a crawl. It seems strange to me that if you do a raid, which by the way is Destiny's pinnacle in-game activity, You can get less XP than a daily dawning bounty that you can pick up in the tower and complete with a few button presses. That seems... no, that should not happen, Bungie. You do a raid, you should be given quite a lot of XP compared to bounties. And this is something I feel like Bungie has really failed on when it comes to the seasonal rank system. And Bungie really needs to go back to the design board and fix this, and soon. So, higher level activities really need to be awarding more XP compared to a bounty that can be completed in a fraction of the time it takes to do these activities. However, things like weekly bounties, those should still retain some good amount because it requires you to do the activities multiple times. Additionally, armor stat rolls seem to be on the very low ends very frequently, even again in the raid where the highest roll should be sourcing from very frequently. This is again one of the reasons why I feel weekly lockouts need to be dropped from raids outside of the first powerful drop in a week. So just to recap on that, you do a raid encounter, first time in a week you get a powerful drop, but if you do it again, you get a non-powerful drop, but it's still a raid drop. I feel like Bungie made the mistake of having a game that has a wide breadth of activities, but a monotonous grind outside of Pinnacle activities, to the point where old content is rarely touched anymore, if not at all. I feel like a resurgence of the Year 1 and Year 2 content is needed, maybe placing powerful, not Pinnacle, but powerful rewards back into some of the Year 1 and Year 2 content would really help in this regard. I will discuss what I feel old raids should have in the next section, but let's finish up here first. I don't feel like Bungie's design intent was a singular loop of collecting daily repeatable bounties from Eris and the Gunsmith, just running around the moon for an hour, turning in the bounties, and then going back and getting more bounties in an endless over and over loop. There really should be a reason to do the old stuff. XP needs to shift away from bounties alone, and there needs to be a greater focus on the higher level activities in terms of the rewards you get from it. So activity rewards is something that really needs to get a second look moving forward. This moves into the next section I wanted to discuss, which is the Pinnacle rewards system. And this is an issue that started to become pretty prevalent over the course of the season, and that is the post-hard cap progression. And in the game right now, there are two means you can go post-cap. You can level up your seasonal artifact, which again, that's tied to XP, and it goes to my previous discussion point. Or you can get 10 points above through an armor increase via the Pinnacle rewards. This is an interesting idea, and I really like that Bungie created a concept that shows a dedication to the end game, but unfortunately it uses Bungie's existing RNG system, which time and time again have been proven to be absolutely atrocious. Additionally, the new raid Garden of Salvation has no power weapons. You can't get a power weapon from the raid because there aren't any. And the encounter-based tables have been shown to be incredibly weighted towards energy weapons, and you can be shot out a complete week of progression by one bad run where you get nothing but energy weapons from a raid run. Additionally, since the raid consists of 57% of your weekly Pinnacle drops, that's not a good thing to have. I really feel like this system is non-sustainable. My proposed solution, and I'm going to show a concept diagram that I put together here, is something the Division 2 did in a recent update, and that's called a targeted loot source system. So we're going to Destiny-fy their system, and here's what I feel like needs to happen. There needs to be a system where in your director, you have a little tab, you can pull it up, and there's a list of weekly activities. You do this objective, and you get a targeted loot drop that's basically a guaranteed piece in that specific slot. So, for example, the kinetic weapon could be something like a weekly completion of a Master Nightmare Hunt time trial. The energy weapon could be a weekly 100k Nightfall, but requires it to be a 980 Nightfall. The power weapon would be weekly completion of all 3 Master Nightmare Hunts. Next, we go up to the armor, and this is where I feel like Bungie could really leverage some of what I was discussing in the previous section about making old content a bit relevant. So for the helmet, I would say you could do something like a flawless raid completion, and this is where you could get fancy with it. You could either have this be a rotating raid, or just make it be any raid flawlessly, so that players can choose to do a raid and still get a pinnacle drop. For the gloves, I would say have it be a weekly dungeon completion, but have this rotate between any of the dungeons in the game at the time. At the moment, we only have 2, but we know for a fact this will be changing in the future. The chest piece could be a weekly raid completion, and again, this could be a rotating one, or allow any raid. For the boots, I feel like you can have this be tied to the seasonal arena, so that way it keeps it relevant, even after, people get what they need from it, so we avoid another Vex offensive problem. And then finally, for the class item, I would suggest a weekly solo dungeon completion, where this could be a rotating one as well. I feel like this system would sprawl out the players' weekly target objectives based on specifically what they're looking for, so they can go and get what they need just by playing the game. Additionally, this keeps old content relevant. Players who missed out on Year 1 and Year 2 typically struggle to find groups for these content pieces because even though it was highlighted with the free experience, most experienced players who have done these content pieces don't want to go back and do those old activities if they're not going to get rewarded from it. So this is where I feel like Bungie can really bring out the line of, yeah, let's make these old activities rewarding again so players want to go and do them. And by extension, would be more willing to help newer players get into the loop as well. Oh, but I can hear it already though, the complaints of the feedback. There's no PvP or Gambit in your table there. Well, good sir, that leads right into my next discussion topic, and that is that PvP is neither in-game or a pinnacle activity, by definition. So many people in the community shy away from these controversial opinion pieces. I love these topics, especially when they need to be talked about, because it gives an opportunity to explain why in a manner that people can understand it. So, again, I will specify with one line. PvP is not an in-game activity. There, I said it. Go ahead, be salty about it. I have argued with far too many people in this community over the past week about this topic. Not one person has provided a legitimate counterpoint to it. Mostly I get the glorious charade of downvotes on the Reddit and the angry, well, PvP is better than PvE responses. Honestly, you're only proving my point. The Crucible has never been a sole point of end in Destiny's content. Hell, even Bungie's own community managers have acknowledged that raiding is the final endgame of Destiny 2. Crucible is nothing more than an afterthought in the game, side activity meant to serve as an alternative player engagement. So why, then, is it that every topic on the forums and the Reddit is, oh, PvP needs this, PvP needs that? Answer is simple, folks. It's because the loudest complaints always come from the vocal minority. Majority of the player base generally sits back, enjoys the game, and accepts that Bungie is doing things for the right reason. So, I say, vocal minority, what you're failing to understand is that PvP will not be fixed in one day. Hell alone, it won't be fixed in a season. This is a process that takes time to rework and get right. There will things that Bungie will do, it will go well. Some things won't go well. This is an iterative process. It's time to understand that it's going to take time, and it's time to be more accepting that things are not going to be exactly what you want them to be. Bungie said that there would be a renewed focus on PvP. So far, this has been held truthfully. There was a mostly successful revamp of the competitive playlist, and the playlist structure had alternate changes that went really well. A lot of people have been praising this as a success. Sure, it needs some more tuning. I talked about this in October. We got some new maps, revamped old maps. The elimination mode is back, and Bungie has been flirting with trials coming back, so, that should be pleasing enough. Bungie has tested a few new successful modes like momentum control, and it's a good start. But there's still people saying that there isn't enough PvP focus. There's no Crucible team. I say you people are out of your damned minds. Coming from the perspective of someone who has done independent game development, I can vouch for the difficulty in these level of changes. It's going to take them time, folks, and in some cases it's going to be a lot of time. Just be thankful that Crucible team wants to involve you in some of these changes. They've made Crucible Labs to let you playtest some of these new modes and changes that they're working on. Sure, it's not around all the time, but that's because they're busy working on it. And then, of course, as I've said at the beginning, there's the absolutely outlandish notion that people make that PvP should include Pinnacle reward drops. Crucible is not a Pinnacle activity, folks. Pinnacle activities are required in a notion that you need a power level to be part of the challenge required to overcome it. Generally, these also have mechanics or modifiers. Outside of Iron Banner, which, might I remind you, already grants Pinnacle rewards, the standard Crucible is not a light level enabled thing. You don't need light level to play Crucible. So no, Crucible should not grant Pinnacle rewards. It should never grant Pinnacle rewards because it's not a Pinnacle activity. What I do agree with is that, sure, you can give Valor resets, Ascendant shards, you can give it enhancement prisms and make sure you get enough to make it worth the time for doing it. But in terms of just giving you free Pinnacle rewards, no, absolutely not. So this is the reason why my recommended targeted loot system does not and will never include PvP sources. Again, if Bungie eventually brings back Trials and this does require light enabled playlist, then sure, I would absolutely be in favor of it. But in the current state of the Crucible, no. So my message to Bungie in regards to this is please ignore these people. I don't want a repeat of Year 3 of Destiny 1 or Year 1 of Destiny 2, where these voices effectively ruined the game for everyone else. You're doing absolutely fine, Bungie. Keep it up. I understand this is iterative. I hope others in the community eventually get that, but you're doing fine. Just stick it to it. All right. Now we go to everyone's favorite talking point, Eververse, and why it needs a second look. So, unfortunately, in Season 7, Bungie had a resurgence of Eververse, and it has spiraled again out of control. Surprise. Majority of the new content of the season is locked behind the Eververse store, and a limited selection of activity-based rewards are available. So, I asked why. We grilled Bungie in Year 1 of Destiny 2 for this. They even came out and promised that moving forward this would not occur. Spoiler alert, it did. Backward Spiral has once again hurt the reputation of the store, and unfortunately I feel like Bungie's own company name in this in favor of extremely overpriced microtransactions. In this case, a whole set of armor can cost more than an entire asking price of the whole season of content. Bungie, that is ridiculous. I could spend an entire video talking about how it would change the store. I'm not going to though, because it would take too long. I feel like the nerfing of the Bright Dust sources was not a good decision, and it's too challenging to earn dust to even get one item out of the store every week. I feel like Bungie really needs to take a hard look at the price points they have set, and non-silver options need to be expanded, especially given that seasonal engrams no longer give new stuff. Also, I mentioned this in October, but I wasn't a fan of the finisher system. It is now evident to me that Bungie literally created finishers to push another Eververse run for players. So really what I said in my last video about that being a waste of development time really even feels more prevalent now. So no, don't do that again, Bungie. You're walking an incredibly tight line in this case, and I implore you to stop before this gets out of control and the players grill you to a point where you won't come back from that. All right, so we've reached the end of my talking points. So let's kind of wrap things up here. Given what I have seen in regards to seasonal content, I'm a bit skeptical about this new Bungie approach. I do understand that the original level of content is no longer feasible given the loss of the two supporting studios following the Activision break. Unfortunately, that doesn't excuse laziness in respect to seasonal conclusions and lackluster activities. It really feels like the effort being placed in areas is not needed in many cases, and the rest of the game is suffering because of it. Season 9 has rectified some of these concerns. The content has been better, and I feel like if they follow the Season 9 model for the rest of the year, they'll do fine. Players have a responsibility to control the hype of seasonal content. Bungie also has a responsibility to curb the expectations of players based on what can be accomplished in the time of the season. Season 8 was buffed up by the expansion, but the season alone was a colossal failure, so moving forward, Bungie needs to make sure that they get this right, and why they need to take the time to understand that in some cases what they're doing is not enough. I understand that the time frame to react to changes between Season 9 and Season 8 was too low, but I really hope they understand that Seasons 10 and 11, they've had more than enough time to make changes, so expectations will be set. Bungie needs to make sure that they're meeting these, otherwise there will be problems in the community. They cannot afford these small micro add-ons to hold players over. There needs to be more meat, otherwise there will be a player base drop again, and I feel like this time Bungie won't recover from it if that happens. So that's pretty much all I've got for my video here. Again, there's not too much to talk about. We're only kicking off Season 9, and this was meant to be a final thoughts on Season 8. The Dawning, it's a repeat. Like I said, I'm not a fan of it. I would really like more innovations. And I feel like Crimson Day is pretty much set in stone too. So we'll see how Season 10 goes. I hope we get some more revamps in the future. Again, this feedback really needs to get the right place, and discussion needs to be had amongst the team. As I said, there were some good things that happened in Season 8, but again, many things went wrong. And I fear this is what always happens when I do these videos. I end up talking about the things that have gone wrong, and they always seem to add up together pretty quickly to make the game feel a lot worse than it actually is. So in terms of this video series, I'm probably going to stick with the same format for this year unless something big comes up, which I don't anticipate. So around the second to third week of the next season, so probably around late March is when you can expect the next video. Unless something else happens between then, that's pretty much all she's gonna write for this one. So thanks for watching, and I will see everyone later.